the atmosphere, as we do that, other people suffer. We don't suffer. We're the ones that may be putting out the pollution, the greenhouse gases, and all the rest of that stuff, but it's not hurting us, it's hurting the Inuit. The Inuit are seeing their whole landscape disappear, their whole way of life disappear, their whole culture disappear. It's hurting the people in the South Pacific, in little island nations like Tuvalu, where the entire nation is likely to be overwhelmed by the sea as the sea level rises. The country is only 10 feet above sea level. Sea level rises 10 feet and they have to leave. There is no more Tuvalu. It's gone. Well, that is clearly a social justice issue. It's unfair for us to be driving SUVs and damaging those people that badly. The other aspect of this is that it's intergenerational. If we take too much today, it's our children and our grandchildren that suffer. And I'd like to turn that one on its head and to point out that we are suffering from what our ancestors did. For an example of that, you need to look no further than the horrible, stunted, miniature dwarf forest that we have in Nova Scotia at this point. 250 years ago, this was a province of huge trees. We made big wooden ships. We shipped great big baulks of timber in them, sold them all over the world. That's gone. That's completely gone. When the Bluenose 2 recently needed a new main boom, which is not the biggest stick in the ship, it had to be brought from British Columbia because there wasn't one tree in this province big enough to make one major spar on one schooner. That's how badly we have been treated by our ancestors. It ought to give us some pause thinking about the way we're going to treat our descendants. So that's the bad news. And I think it's plenty bad enough. But there is good news, and we don't want to stop, I think, here. One of the things that we often hear or think or feel ourselves is that these problems are so vast and so overpowering that there's nothing we can do about them. It's too hard. It's too demanding. It's too difficult. I'm only one person. What am I going to do about this? And I think we often forget how much we actually have done. In 1995, the nations of the world decided that CFCs were having a terrible impact on the ozone layer. And there was a hole growing over each of the poles. Remember this? And we came together, the people of the world, and we banned the use of CFCs. By 2003, the ozone holes were closing up again. By 2050, they're expected to be closed completely, and they're completely healed. 1997, after a very short campaign, we, the people of the world, banned landmines. I was astounded that that happened and that it happened so quickly, and proud, very proud, that Canada played such a leading role in it. But we forget that we do, in fact, come together as the people of the world and make these kind of decisions and make them stick. Another example is DDT. When I was a kid, DDT was a really serious issue. It's not a serious issue anymore. Another one. Hands up, everybody in this room who used to smoke. How many still smoke? Not very many. A couple of hands here and there. That's been a big change in a matter of, what, 20 years. So change certainly does happen, and it starts, I think this is a key point, it starts between our ears. It starts because we start to think differently about the world we're in and about the way we're living in it. And I think there are some major, major changes going on right now in terms of the way we think about things and the way we understand things. For example, I would think that probably nobody in this room, well, there may be some advanced souls in this room, but very few of us in this room would have understood the term carbon trading 10 years ago. And it's still not a part of our lives in a normal day-to-day way, but it can be. When we take an airplane flight, we now have the opportunity to buy emission carbon credits to compensate for the carbon we're going to put out in that airplane flight. So we're starting to think about that kind of thing. We're starting to think about about our obligations as far as carbon is concerned. We start to think about food miles. You know, a phrase that was new to me about 2 years ago. But in Nova Scotia, we import today 88% of our food. 88%. It constitutes 14% of our energy use, just bringing the food to us. And the average food item that lands on our table has traveled 2,000 kilometers. I don't know about tonight's turkey, but the average food item in Nova Scotia travels 2,000 kilometers before we see it. Well, that's a new metric. That's something we weren't thinking about or measuring. Now we are. Another one is the ecological footprint. We didn't used to think about how much of the Earth's resources each of us was entitled to take and how much we were taking. Now we know that. Now we know that if you divide the area of the Earth by the number of people on Earth, each of us is entitled to the produce of 1.8 hectares. 1.8 hectares. But we take 2.8. We take the produce of 2.8, which means we are using our natural capital. We're not living on our natural income. Some parts of the world use much less. Bangladesh, 0.6 of a hectare. Some places use much more. Canadians use 7.7 hectares. We're entitled to 1.8, but we use 7.7, about 4 times as much as we're entitled to. Nova Scotians use 8.1 hectares. And the reason for that is that we generate our electricity from coal, which is one of the dirtiest fuels around. And many of us live in great big old drafty wooden houses that are difficult to heat. You may have noticed that in the last few months. I certainly did. So that puts our footprint way up. But we weren't thinking about this 10 years ago, and now we are. Another splendid example is an organization in St. Margaret's Bay, GPI Atlantic, which is working on something called a Genuine Progress Index. When we hear about the economy having grown, the usual measurement is gross domestic product. And gross domestic product means everything that happened in the economy where money changed hands. Not all of that was positive. From the point of view of GDP, Halifax was probably in wonderful shape just after the explosion because there was a huge demand for labor and materials to rebuild the broken city. Well, we all know that wasn't genuine progress. So GPI sets out to measure things that really do matter, that really do count, and to deduct things that are really bad news. For example, when a forest is cut down, the GDP only counts the value of the wood. The GPI says, what did we lose? What did we lose from the forest? This forest absorbed carbon dioxide. This forest held water, kept erosion at bay, provided habitat for birds and fish and pollinating insects and so forth. That has value. It doesn't have value in the GDP, but it does have in the GPI, and we're starting to think about that kind of thing. This is all, to my mind, is real progress. And we're also seeing, I think, real change even happening locally. My favorite example of that is a little company called Taylor Lumber in Middle Musquodoboit that harvests only as much lumber as will be regrown in the course of the year, cuts it up into lumber, takes the waste product and burns that in a generator. It produces electricity that not only powers the mill, but also